Hi, everyone. Nice to see you this week. Hopefully, it's going to be a great week for you and that it didn't start off too rough yesterday. My eyes are going back and forth because I'm trying once again to get Instagram online here. There we go. For some reason, you have to hit a different button for Instagram than you do everybody else, Facebook and YouTube. If you didn't know, you can see this on Facebook, which most of you are probably watching right now. But you can also see this on Instagram as well, and when it's and also on YouTube. So when it's on YouTube, it will also have the closed captioning on it. At least I believe it does. I better double check that before making false claims. Anyway, me, myself, and I have an interesting presentation today. I'm going to talk to you about the next coming collapse. And you're going to see just how literal that word is in a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to just remind you all to please go to YouTube and like and subscribe to the videos. And then go to Preparedness Pro here on Facebook and click to follow us. That would be wonderful. It's a page instead of a group. I will be starting up a page here in the next couple, not a page, a group. I will be starting a group here in a couple of weeks. I'll tell you all about it. There's some specific plans in store for it, in which everyone will be able to comment, post what they'd like to, and have conversation amongst each other, et cetera, more like a forum. And that will be posted here on Facebook, and it will be there until I get an actual forum built out, which I am working on. I just had to put the cookbook to sleep, which is now to sleep. Yay. I get my proof on Saturday, I believe. Not that it makes much difference. It goes live on Tuesday. And I'm just finishing up everything that I needed to do to get it in hardback form as well, so that doesn't lag behind the other sales like it did before, because some people were disappointed that they didn't just go ahead and buy the hardback. So I want to have everything that you need when you need it when it comes time for this. So let's go ahead and rock and roll. It's good to see you here. Nice to see ya. Thanks for coming and joining us. That's nice. I don't know if people want me to say their names or not, because it's preparedness, and first rule of preparedness is you don't talk about preparedness. So anyway, okay, let's go ahead. I've got lots of notes on here because there's lots of facts, but before I start, I want to kind of quiz you a little bit. Tell me if you can guess what country this is. Okay, what country do you think I'm talking about? So in this country, there's over 150,000 of their bridges that are just decrepit. They are structurally deficient, and that structurally deficient is a legal term, or they have been considered, quote, functionally obsolete. That's over a third of all of their bridges in the entire country. A third of the nation's highways are in really poor, or poor is the grade, or mediocre shape. There are massively leaking water and sewage systems that are critical health hazards, and that they're contaminating the rivers and the streams that they use for water. There are, along with that, there's weakened and woefully under-maintained levees and dams, towers, and those they are over communities and schools. Some of these dams, the power grid is maxed out. It disrupts millions of lives, putting entire cities in the dark on a regular basis. So in my research in this country, I found out that more than a fourth of the bridges are considered to be at risk for collapse. I mean, that's how shoddy they were at the time of the rating. There was a key bridge that went down and it was one of the most significant bridges in that nation to have gone down. It was just horrible. It was a complete collapse. It was a very high profile bridge, and the political uproar was that it had been rated structurally deficient back in 1990, and no one had done anything about it. No one had spent the money on it or the time or the impact or anything like that. So it collapsed in 2007. So sounds pretty third world nation, doesn't it? I mean, am I right or am I right? But guess what? I am talking about the good old US of A. You got it, Preparedness HQ. You got it. Thanks for joining us too, by the way. Yeah, I'm talking about the US. So what happened is I was reading an article about the Coast Guard having to replace their aging equipment and what's been going on with that. And then one thing led to another. And so I spent, probably 12 hours research looking at the various key infrastructure in our nation. And it's crazy. There's a really great book. In fact, let me pull up. I want to make sure I get the author's name correct. Stephen Flynn wrote a book called The Edge of Disaster. Great book. Enlightening, to say the least. It's a little older. So just read his information and go, yep, it's 10 times worse now. So let me just share with you what I found about the Coast Guard equipment, okay? So the U.S. Coast Guard, significant challenges with aging equipment, okay, and infrastructure. And it's a problem that's become increasingly urgent in recent years. I'm just going to move my screen here a little bit. So many of the Coast Guard ships and aircraft and communication systems are decades old. It limits their operational ability and efficiency. So can you imagine getting the call from Governor Santos and having to say, well, we can do that and we can do that, but we can't do that because our equipment's out. So, but I'm talking about the U.S. Coast Guard here, so that would be a different call. Anyway, so they have an aging fleet. Their cutters, those are the large ships that they use for missions like search and rescue, law enforcement, and environmental protection. Those vessels are, almost all of them are 50 years old or older. And for example, the medium endurance cutters, those are key assets in counter drug and migrant interdiction operations. They've been in service since the 1960s. And they suffer from frequent breakdowns. So imagine, a high-speed chase. All right, we're on them. There goes the engine. Icebreakers. The U.S. has a very limited number of functional icebreakers, which are critical for Arctic operations. The U.S. Coast Guard operates only 2 icebreakers, one of which is 40 years old. This shortage is really concerning given the increased strategic importance of the Arctic as ice melts and new shipping lanes are opening up. So yeah, kind of important. Let's talk about the aircraft. Most people don't think about the Coast Guard's fleet of aircraft, but they have helicopters and airplanes that also need updates. Many of the helicopters in use, they're the MH-60 Jayhawks. And they are decades old. They require constant maintenance. And the aircrafts are essential for search and rescue operations, as well as for responding to natural disasters like, hurricanes. The communication and technology is outdated. It hinders the Coast Guard's ability to coordinate effectively during, your large-scale operations or emergencies. And with limited resources for any modernization, I couldn't say it, modernization, the Coast Guard often relies on, less reliable systems like smoke signals. No, I'm just kidding. But they're really vulnerable because of the failures. So that doesn't sound like a first world, we are the most powerful entity or country in the world. It doesn't. It doesn't. It's the U.S. Coast Guard, folks. Not that's. Yeah. Of course, if even if their equipment did work well, we wouldn't allow them to do some of their job, of course. That's a whole nother story. I won't talk about that. But clearly there's a problem. Now, why do I call that the coming collapse? What I'm going to do today is I'm going to paint a puzzle for you. And I'm going to give you little pieces of the puzzle. So this Coast Guard issue is just one piece of the puzzle. And I want you to put the puzzle together. I'll hold your hand quite a bit, but I want you to actually listen to this and think, maybe I better have some counter moves for this vulnerability. So let's talk about real quick the New York City subway system. I don't know if you're aware of that, but even on a dry day, they have about 200 pump rooms that are removing between 13 and 15 million gallons of water that seep into the tunnels in the underground. 13 to 15 million gallons of water. They have to pump that out. So imagine what happens on a rainy day. Yeah. That's how decrepit their infrastructure is. And you can imagine the force of all that water is making that infrastructure much more healthy, right? Don't you love my sarcasm? I mean, ain't it beautiful? Can you always tell when it's on? Yeah, it's kind of scary. So what I was talking about, that major bridge collapse, that was the I-35 West Bridge in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That's one of the most high-profile bridge disasters we've had. And the NTSB specifically stated at that point, that was 2007, that the NTSB is neglecting its duty to protect Americans. This is the NTSB that stated that. They were ignoring the inefficiency and irresponsibility among government agencies responsible for the bridge. It was first rated and the alarm was first set up. Alarm, not, this might be a problem. No, alarm in 1990. And then in no time in between 1990 and 2007 was the bridge's condition ever raised above a poor rating, ever. We don't live in a third world country, people. And yet we're demanding more and more of our country every day, with, hundreds of millions of, I won't say hundreds of millions, but tens of millions of additional people coming in every year. It's ridiculous. I don't have the actual number on that. I'm speaking a little bit of hyperbole there, but still, it doesn't make sense that we're spending so much money on foreign nations and on foreigners coming into our nation illegally, and yet we're not spending what we need to bring our infrastructure up. So let's talk a little bit more just about how bad that is. We could literally become, this is kind of jarring, we could become a third world country overnight with just one seemingly benign occurrence, because the infrastructure of our country is so volatile. You've probably heard people talk about the New Madrid fault line. That would wreak havoc in our nation if there was an earthquake. But what I'm trying to say is we don't even need the New Madrid fault line, which is very realistic, very realistic. It would be right in the heart of the Midwest, Memphis area and surrounding. It would cripple our economy if the New Madrid earthquake went crazy. So we don't typically think of our infrastructure of our nation the same way that we take breathing for granted. Our water system, our road system, our sewage systems, food, and electrical system is taken for granted. I just this whole taken for granted thing. I was reading a post in another prepper group, and a woman was just irate that the power wasn't on yet. And she was hit in a bad area. And I can understand in part why she was irate, because of how she had been treated. But it is just, we just take it for granted that, you know, we'll always have power. We'll always have drinking water. We can turn that faucet on and poof. But the people in Flint, Michigan still are dealing with poisoned water. Still dealing with it. We're still forking out tax dollars to give them water instead of fixing the problem. So, food for thought. Most do not realize that the US is hurtling towards a time when vital utilities will regularly drop out. When I lived in the Philippines, we called them brownouts, and it was expected that we would have a brownout every day. But do you know there's parts of this nation that they've come to expect brownouts, blackouts, but brownouts? Roadways will become impassable due to disrepair. What you see in the hurricane hit areas. Sorry, ooh, old age creeping in there. That can happen due to disrepair, and it could cripple metropolitan areas. Millions believe that this comfort luxury afforded to every American is just going to go on forever. But what I'm trying to tell you is without drastic intervention, the nation inevitably faces a cataclysmic, and I don't say that lightly, collapse. So because we are so vulnerable to just-in-time delivery, to how other people run their finances, and we'll talk about that specifically, how that's impacted people's lives. Utilities and services have to be maintained to continue to live the way we do, and yet they're not. And yet without them, nearly everything in the US comes to an immediate halt. We just have our heads in the sand, and it's disturbing. Ted Koppel, was it Ted Koppel? Tim Bradshaw, Ted Koppel. Boy, do I get my names mixed up. Anyway, the book's called Lights Out. Read it. Oh, please don't ever let me interview famous people. All right, so we don't need a massive earthquake. We don't need a Hurricane Katrina or a Hurricane Helene or Milton. We don't need a famine. We don't need a financial collapse to bring us crumbling to our knees. And that's why I wanted to do this video today. That's why I wanted to bring it to your minds of just how vulnerable we are, because we're vulnerable in every aspect of our infrastructure, so exceedingly that a simple occurrence could throw us back into the 1890s. And the longer that it might take us to recover from such an instance, the further back we'll go. So 1890 might be pretty good considering. Right now we have over 72,860 some bridges that are too old. They're considered structurally deficient. I mean, let's be realistic. We're not going to have to entire cities that are going to be abandoned just because they're sitting on a major fault line. I mean, otherwise nobody would be living on the Madrid fault line. There's also substantial threats, though, from increased settlement densities near our major rivers with their vulnerable levees, especially in the St. Louis area, which is on the Madrid fault line, too. You have substantial settlements in the Sacramento Valley of California that are as much as 10 feet below the rivers because of the compacting of the earth and the removal of the vegetation, and even higher levees. Since the levees are poorly maintained, these settlements are vulnerable to both floods and earthquakes. And you've got the dikes around the largest lake in Florida. Those are also threatened, and thus thousands of homes and fresh water supplies for lower Florida are all threatened. Dense settlements are creeping is what I meant to say, creeping closer to Mount Rainier, and an eruption of that mountain would send lava flows all the way to Seattle. Now, I don't believe that government should step in and start telling people to abandon their homes and job and move elsewhere. I think government needs to step in with what we pay them and start repairing our infrastructure. I do think that we're a bit cavalier in our awareness of these issues. that are in our immediate area and what we expect to impact us in the future. So that's why I wanted to do this video today, is to bring it to the forefront of your minds and realize this is a more likely collapse that could happen anytime. Knock on wood that it doesn't, but I'm just giving you the facts today, and you can make a decision for yourself. So in 2009, CBS reported about the Lake Champlain Bridge between New York and Vermont. That opened in 1928, and it carries about 4,000 vehicles a day. But in 2009, it suddenly closed down without any warning whatsoever. Engineers became so alarmed because they inspected underwater pilings that were compromised. And they closed that bridge in 10 minutes. That's how bad it was. You got to understand, the fact that they were even inspecting the bridge was a godsend, because there aren't enough inspectors to do these bridge inspections and these dam inspections in the entire US. We are lucky to get them inspected once every 4 years. Once every 4 years, folks. So the fact that that bridge was inspected that day and shut down in 10 minutes is definitely a God move. The bridge was blown up in December of that year, and then the only way across it for 2 years was a 90-minute drive, because the new bridge cost at least $70 million, and this went on for 2 years. There is a bridge there now. I mean, you think people complained enough? There was also a ferry that you could take that extended your time quite a bit as well. But let's look at the U.S. in comparison to the world and what other nations are spending on infrastructure. So let's take a guess at how we compare. So China spends about 4.8% of its GDP on infrastructure. It spends the highest among their major economies, but it spends 4.8% of its GDP. European countries like Germany and the UK and France generally spend just under 1%. They're about 0.9%. And sometimes they'll spend as much as 1.5%, depending on the country and its infrastructure needs. The Philippines, which is a third world nation, spends 5 to 6%. Okay. India spends 1.5%. And I was trying to think who else I came across that I was really interested in. Canada spends approximately 1.8% of its GDP. So what would you guess? Oh, excuse me. No, India spends 3.4%. Yes, I was getting that mixed up. India spends 3.4%. So what would you guess that the U.S. spends? The U.S., the best country in the world. What do you think they would spend on infrastructure? Any guesses? It ain't pretty, folks. They spend half of 1% on their infrastructure. Now, when I'm done with this, you'll see just how crippling our infrastructure is. And yet our nation spends a whopping half of 1% on our infrastructure. Yeah, isn't that great? It's significantly lower than obviously the countries that we're talking about. I mean, Japan, France, and China, they all have high-speed rail. All we're doing is just talking about it. To achieve there's grades given every 4 years. There's a grade given of the roadways, the levees, the water, everything. To achieve, I'll tell you what our grade is here in just a second, but to achieve a B grade, we would need to spend over $2.5 trillion. Now, if I'm telling you to achieve a B grade, that obviously means we're lower. We are actually anywhere, depending on what aspect you're looking at, we're anywhere between a D plus and a C minus, folks. And the C is a big improvement, because we have been at a D something for the last 8 reviews that have been done. Yeah. Without this investment, Critical infrastructures like roads, bridges, and public transit are going to deteriorate, leading to just higher long-term costs for maintenance and lost economic productivity. So we're bleeding money. We're the New York subway bleeding out all of this water. To achieve an A grade for U.S. infrastructure, it would require significantly higher investment, but it would require that we invest 3.5% of our GDP. So we would need to kick things up. What would that help? We have about 48,890 miles of interstate highways that are part of the U.S. interstate highway system. And approximately 1/4 of all vehicles are driven on those every day. 1/4 of all vehicles driven on them. This means that millions of Americans rely on the interstate system daily for their commutes, their travel, their transportation needs. And that also means that we rely on them for the truckers to get us what we want and our just-in-time mentality needs. So according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, as of 2024, they got more specific. 42,067 bridges in the U.S. are classified as structurally deficient. Next time you drive over a bridge, I wonder if this is one of them. Additionally, I'm not done. Nearly 221,800 bridges across the country need some form of immediate repair. That means approximately 1 in 3 bridges requires maintenance or upgrades. Yeah. Are they getting them? Nope. When was the last time you saw a bridge down for upgrades? It's rare, isn't it? So let's talk about the grades. The civil engineers issue a report card every 4 years. Overall, we've received C's and mostly D's. So in 2001, we got a whopping D+, 2005 a D, 2009 a D, 2013 D+, baby. 2017 D+, 2021 we actually got a C-. Now, at the risk of being political, because I try not to be political, now let's see, who was president prior to that time, prior to that report card? Anyway, just a thought. The most recent report card in 2021 gave us the U.S. infrastructure of that C-. That reflected everything. But if you look at some of the things individually, like drinking water, energy, and aviation, there were some D's in there as well. It was a collective C- grade. So in order to have a C- grade, you've got to have some D's in there too. One of the things I came across was in 2009, a crack was found in the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and it snapped a cable that was built in 1936. The cables are that old, folks. In the past 10 years, the U.S. has seen several notable bridge collapses and major repairs. Pittsburgh in 2022 collapsed due to structural deficiencies, leading to a federal investigation. You had this Saget River Bridge in Washington in 2013. A section collapsed after being struck by a truck. Now you can say, oh yeah, well that was because it was struck by a truck. Hello, cars go across these. Of course they're going to get dinged up. We've got to build bridges that are going to withstand the cars that they transport on them. In 2021, the I-40 bridge in Tennessee was closed for emergency repairs due to a crack found in the steel beam that required rapid response. We had 1,800 people die in Hurricane Katrina, the majority of which was due to the levees breaking. And as you know, there's areas that were hit by Katrina that still have not been rebuilt. What about pipelines exploding? That's interesting. Over the past decade, we've got several significant gas pipeline explosions and incidents that have occurred in the U.S. You had the San Bruno, California, 2010. That was one of the deadliest incidents occurred when the PG&E pipeline explosion killed 8 people and destroyed homes. PG&E faced legal penalties, but I don't see the people who were killed and their homes destroyed being compensated yet. Isn't that interesting? See, that's part of the problem is private corporations are supposed to be maintaining these things. We've abdicated our responsibility as the U.S. Department of Engineers to private entities to maintain, but we have no consequences when they don't maintain. And that needs to happen in this nation. East Harlem, New York, 2014. We had a gas explosion resulted in the deaths of 8 people, with many more injured. Con Ed was later found responsible. They paid a settlement of $153 million, but that was to settle safety violations and fund pipeline repairs. It wasn't to settle and fix things. It was supposed to fund the pipeline repairs, but guess who gobbled up the majority of the money? The safety violations. It was ridiculous. Oh, we're going to have to fine you for that. Yeah, and what are you going to spend that on? Don't get me started there. I will get in trouble if I start there. The Merrimack Valley, Massachusetts, 2018, there were a series of gas explosions caused by overpressurization. Only one person was killed. I say only one. That one person was obviously important to many people. It injured 25, but it led to the destruction of a whole bunch of homes. In this case, they did hold Columbia Gas responsible, but it took a class action lawsuit. Columbia Gas didn't just say, yeah, we did it. We're sorry. Here, let's take care of these things. Nope, they had to be compelled. And then most recent one, 2022 in Kansas, you had a section of the Keystone Pipeline. It leaked over almost 600,000 gallons of crude oil, making it the worst oil spill in history. In its history, I should say, not our history. Okay, so what about drinking water? This is one of the reasons why I preach drinking water. You've got to have water stored, is because these results are compelling to that end. The events that I've mentioned thus far illustrate the dangers of an aging infrastructure, of excavation damage and regulatory lapses. We're not holding people accountable. All the dams I wrote about in Neanderthals in the Kitchen, I wrote about the realistic threats we have to water, and I got into great detail about the dams, for example. I'm not even mentioning those on here today. But our drinking water as a nation got a C-. It reflects some improvement from previous years, largely due to increased funding for replacing aging water lines. But a C-, come on, I had C- water in the Philippines, and I had to filter it every day. The U.S. still faces significant challenges, including frequent water main breaks. We have over 640 water main breaks every day in the U.S. and water loss. And we get charged more and more on our sewer bill and our water bill because of this water loss. So we're paying for that. Inlands and waterways got a whopping D+. Those systems continue to face issues with, you've got aging locks and dams, again, leading to costly delays and maintenance needs. And that's despite this increased federal investment that we're supposed to get. There's a substantial backlog of projects requiring attention. Levees. Many of the nation's levees are in poor condition, with an estimated investment gap of billions of dollars needed to improve just those. It poses a risk to communities during flood events due to insufficient funding for repairs and upgrades. And then our roads. Our roads got a D. They noted that around 43% of the roads in the U.S. are in poor or mediocre condition, which leads to increased operating vehicle costs and contributes to traffic congestion. And then last but not least is wastewater. You know, that important thing of wastewater. We got a D+ on that. Wastewater infrastructure, struggling as many treatment plants near the end of their design life. Around 15% of the nation's wastewater facilities are at or above capacity. We need a substantial investment to keep up with them and improve the systems. So back in 2009, we got a report card of D-. We got Ds in our aviation, dams, and hazardous. In 2000, it was a D+. And here we are all these years later, and the best that we can do is a C-. Are we seeing a pattern here? Are you thinking maybe it's going to get better? History will not support that theory. I'm not seeing it get better under the present circumstances anyway. We have a domino effect, and I'm going to talk about that in tomorrow's video. Like Detroit, for example, because of insufficient funding, because they're trying to just bang money on the maintenance of all these problem areas, they had to close 12 fire stations in 2005. 2005 is a long time ago. I realize that, but I have a lot of stories from that. And that's why I'm using it. There was a fire that spread rapidly throughout the city. It destroyed more than 85 homes and structures. It took over an hour for firefighters to get to it. They were short over 100 firemen. So now we're putting people's lives at risk because we're not taking care of our home. Can you imagine how painful it is for someone who had a family member killed on a bridge collapse to see that the U.S. is paying for building a new bridge in some foreign nation? Before the U.S. went into Iraq, there was infrastructure, but much of it had to be repaired as a result of the bombs that we built to fix that which we broke. It's part of the cost of war, and it's necessary before we leave the area. But paying for that before we pay for our own home, I don't know. It doesn't seem right. Or paying for other things that are not taking care of this nation. That's the only obligation they have. That's the only authorization they have with our tax dollars, is to do what we can't do for ourselves. Take care of the whole nation and the infrastructure I'm talking about, and to protect us from enemies, foreign and domestic. Nope. I see more enemies, domestic. I see them by the handfuls. It's not happening. They're not doing the one thing they're required to do with our tax dollars. It's the only thing they're authorized to do with our tax dollars. Not to decide whether or not you tell mom and dad about your 7-year-old who decides that they want to be a girl when they were born a boy. That's not what our tax dollars were supposed to go for. And yet we've got federal programs with that. I'd much rather know that I'm not going to die on a bridge. Wouldn't you? All right. So part 2 tomorrow, and we'll talk about more of this and what we can do about this. So hope there's no significant questions, because this was just part 1. We will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.